For me, it was about value creation and value creation for every actor in an ecosystem instead of value extraction. Coming from Silicon Valley was always like, how can we make as much money as possible, extract as much value as possible, and give value, but how are we going to charge as much as we can and make as much money as we can and get as much data as we can? And not that those are bad values, but that's just what drove the product market fit value capture structure of traditional companies. And I learned about DAOs and about token-based models, and it was like a win could be built where you had users, builders, and workers, and service providers. So you have this whole the founding team, the users, the service workers, everybody wins financially and from a goal perspective.
Hey there, good people in crypto land. I'm Matt Leising. Welcome back to my podcast, Decent People. On the show today, I've got Jack O'Halloran. He is the co-founder and CEO of SKALE Labs, which is a scaling solution, a layer 2, if you will, on Ethereum that promises to be much faster and much cheaper to use than the current L1 Ethereum. We talk a lot about that in the show, about how they're offering gasless transactions because they've come up with a new model for paying for transaction fees where it's more of a wholesale kind of approach rather than by transaction approach. So you're basically buying compute time on the network and then you can use that how you see fit rather than having to pay per every transaction that you want to run. We talked about his time as a receiver for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. He played in Division I NCAA football and growing up in a ranch in Nebraska and how football is like Friday Night Lights kind of situation in Texas and about life in general. We talked about his time in Silicon Valley after he graduated and how he learned that there was a lot about extraction there and trying to take value from customers. And then when he came across Web3, how he really liked that all the participants in the ecosystem had incentives and could get paid for what they were doing. And we talked about scale and what he sees as a sort of future with L2s and different types of blockchain applications and how artificial intelligence can be applied to help with some of the infrastructure and kind of building blocks that every blockchain needs. So with all that out of the way, let's get to the conversation. I hope you enjoy it and thanks a lot for listening. Hey, Jack, how you doing?
Hey, doing good. Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you on the show. Thank you for coming. Where am I talking to you from today?
I am in San Francisco.
Okay. I was wondering, is it as bad as everyone says? I've been hearing like a lot of stuff about the city, and I'm just curious what your take is on it.
I've been living here for a long time. I think I moved here in 2006. I lived for a while in Europe. I lived for a while in Napa, and I moved back. And I have to say, I think the city's definitely on the rise again. It had some issues to get over, and it's still getting over those, but still some things to be worked on. But it's not as bad as people say. And I'm a long-term believer in San Francisco. Yeah, but in like many cities, it depends on what part of town you're in.
Yeah, that's a huge point there. And yeah, I've got a bit of a conflicted history with San Francisco. Being a Los Angeles native myself, there's that rivalry, of course, between the cities. I was very glad to see the Lakers beat Golden State in the playoffs this year, stuff like that. And then I lived there for 4 years and then in Berkeley for 3.
The city got it just overgrew itself. That was one of the biggest issues. There's obviously crime and tents and things that cause other issues. But one thing was just a lot of people didn't want to be here and there wasn't the infrastructure to support them. And they left and moved to Miami and Austin and New York. And it was like a pressure release. The pressure valve just got released. And so it's just improved, I think, just from that perspective as well.
I remember after the .com bubble burst, it was nice. You could drive down to Palo Alto in 30 minutes. Yeah. There's nobody on the road and it just felt like tumbleweeds were blowing around. But yeah, speaking of different parts of town, my brother lived for years in the Tenderloin and I couldn't go visit him after a while. It was just too nasty. And I think I was reading a story in the New York Times about the Tenderloin and they're like featuring it on 6th Street. And I'm like, oh my God, that's where Adam lives. And I'm reading it. And then I'm like, they quote him in the story. And I'm like, holy crap. He started like a community group to try to clean things up and stuff. So that was a funny shock to read your brother's quotes. He didn't even tell me. I've been like a reporter my whole career. You'd think you would tell me, hey, I'm going to be in the New York Times.
Yeah.
But anyway, I found out about it serendipitously. I don't know. Too early for that word. Anyway, yeah, thanks so much for coming on. You co-founded Scale, which is a blockchain network, and that is seeking to be really fast and very cheap and to appeal to all sorts of different applications like gaming, NFTs, and all that stuff. But I'd love to hear, before we get into that, just back up and hear about your background and where you grew up and what were you doing as a kid and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm originally from Nebraska. I'm from a kind of cowboy town in western Nebraska. Grew up a very different life than I'm living now. And yeah, I have to say, it was a phenomenal place to grow up. It was just different types of fun. And I love going back. I've got three kids and I'm taking them back this summer. And so, yeah, I grew up and not knowing much about tech, didn't grow up in the,
Were
you
you on a
know,
ranch or?
I grew up just on the outskirts of town, but had a lot of friends that were ranchers and farmers, and like summer job, I used to bale hay and help
Yeah.
my buddy's dad, who's a veterinarian. We'd go take care of cattle, and so
Yeah.
it was a fun, different life. And now I'm living in cities and flying around the world all the time. Good
Was there
contrast.
any cow tipping involved in your childhood?
Yeah, cow tipping, I think, is more of a myth. I
Is
just
it?
would not want to be chased down by a cow in the middle of the night. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. What were your folks doing?
My mom was a teacher and my dad was a surgeon.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And so one of the things that just jumped out at me on your, like, into your background and stuff is that you played football for the Nebraska Cornhuskers in Division One. Were you drawn to football early in life? Is that like a thing in Nebraska, like a Texas sort of thing where everybody is, the football life is huge?
Oh yeah, it's a religion in Nebraska. So
Yeah.
yeah, growing up there, and I had opportunities to go to the coast and go to school and play different places, and especially during that era where Nebraska was really good, my that was my number one goal, was to go play football at Nebraska. And yeah, it is. If you haven't been to a game, if you're listening, like, I highly recommend it. Nebraska has been on the way up now, is what I'll say, as opposed
Yeah.
to down. But it was also, yeah, different. Grew up different context, and you grew up in fourth grade, full padded, playing football, and yeah, just like definitely very much like Texas, I'd say, in terms of it being a religion and something people really care about.
Yeah. So did you know at that age that like you were good enough to make it? And were people telling you that, or was it just something you worked on and it worked out for you?
You know what? I grew up in a town where no one thinks anyone's good enough to do things. So I just had to have this. It was a great life lesson. And you hear a lot about imposter syndrome, but and I didn't. I grew up. I was in the largest class, sporting class, in terms of my school size, but we were the furthest west town. So we were the Hicks living, and cowboys living out in western Nebraska, and no one was. It was like a pipe dream to think you could go do something like that. And so for me, I had to have this self dialogue to say, I can do it. I believe I can do it. And I couldn't even tell people, because people would be like, oh, you're not going to be able to do that. Only people from out of state or Omaha or Lincoln are going to go play for the Huskers. So it was,
Is that a type of like Midwestern humility that,
yeah,
that they,
yeah,
yeah.
tallest nail gets pounded down type thing.
And then, so obviously you made it there and you're playing in, like, what was that like? Like how many fans are in the stadium there at Nebraska?
Yeah, I mean, there's 90,000 people at every game, and it's
Wow.
sold out for 40 years in a row, and it was a crazy experience. And in Nebraska, you're a celebrity if you're on the team. People know who you are, and it was a really interesting experience, and a good training for going and starting companies later and getting into the workforce of just all the things you have to deal with. And I remember one year I was a starter, and my junior year, and then something happened and I wasn't starting. Got benched, and I was not starting the next game, and everybody in my hometown's calling me and, what's wrong? It was like an immense amount of like pressure, and also like feelings of failure, that you just like really good life lessons.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine, especially at that early age when, yeah, college students aren't usually put under that kind of pressure, certainly not publicly. Did any of your teammates go on to play in the pros?
Oh yeah, yeah. We had a big NFL pipeline back then. I had a dream to play in the NFL too, and then I got injured. I started my junior year, ended up have a really bad injury that really impacted me my senior year, but was able to just play with a lot of guys that went to the NFL, probably at least 30.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, so that was fun. It was cool. It's different when you see your friends on TV and
Yeah.
seeing them suit up. It's a cool
Y-
experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're ranching, you're doing like stuff with veterinary stuff, you're playing football. Does tech come into your world at all when you were a kid?
You know what? I have to say, my tech experience was all about doing Claris works on a Mac, dating myself a bit, just learning how to type. But I was not a technologist at all. I didn't have any sort of affinity towards computers or technology. I just didn't understand it. I didn't grow up in a place where it was like even understood. I don't think there wasn't even a computer science class in my school that I knew of. So if you wanted to learn to, I don't think I knew anybody who even knew how to write code.
Okay.
And for me, I got, just really lucky. I had a couple of my dad's brothers lived in the Bay Area, and they said, "Hey, you need to come out and work in tech." And I was like, "Ah, no." And one of them talked me into coming out and doing informational interviews. And I flew out to San Francisco, and next thing I know, I was like, "I'm moving to San Francisco. I'm going to work in tech." And my friends are saying, like, "What? You're going to work in tech?" And yeah, I had to just put a lot of work ethic, same work ethic I put into sports, into just learning about technology, learning how to code. And when it's anybody thinking of working in tech, what I'd say is you can do it if you put the work in.
What was the thing that appealed to you about it? Was there, and what era are we in here in the tech world? Was
Listen,
there something that just grabbed you?
2005. Yeah,
2005.
2005 when I
Okay.
graduated college. And for me, it was really interesting to see how from the outside, it's almost magical how these things work. And I started understanding this like layering and like foundational element of knowledge. If you learn this, and then the next thing's accessible, you can learn that. And it turned into this, just sparked my intellectual curiosity. And then started working in mobile and actually cryptography and security in my first job. And it just sparked this interest of like enterprise software to me that was a geeky topic, but it's just a lot of smart people trying to solve problems. And I think that's what really turned me on, was just the brains that were trying to figure out better ways to do things and build things that then touch people's lives back in Nebraska and other places. But that was the thing that captured me about Silicon Valley.
Yeah. And so what were some of the first jobs you had that sort of like where you cut your teeth?
My first company that I worked for was called Good Technology. So this was back when BlackBerry was a big thing, and Good was BlackBerry's main competitor. And it was essentially a mobile computing platform for if you wanted to have all the other hosts of smartphones, Palm Trios and iPhones and Nokias and Samsungs, and a company wanted to enable your email and applications, they would use Good. And so my first job, I was actually in sales, which was great for me because it was a good way to start learning the tech, and eventually moved into product management and partnerships and doing other things that were more gave me the training I needed to go start an enterprise software company. But yeah, starting in sales to me was I think just perfect outlet where, I could use the strengths I had and also hone some new skills.
Yeah. And I noticed on your LinkedIn, you were a student ambassador for Red Bull. So it looks like you had that kind of in your pocket already. Like you were probably, like you said, a celebrity and popular and athletic, and that all just came naturally to you.
Yeah, by the way, Red Bull has a phenomenal student program where they have one ambassador at each university. And you get this knowledge of marketing and grassroots marketing, and you go to this training camp where you literally drink the Kool-Aid and they train you, and then you get other people to drink the Kool-Aid. And I did it for 3 years in college, and it was a huge, I think, piece of my huge learning for me to see how they built. At the end of the day, the philosophy was, we're selling liquid ingredients that probably only cost them a penny to create, and they sell it for $2.
Yeah.
So you can't, if you're doing that, you have to sell something that's bigger than the chemicals and the liquids in the can. You have to sell a brand. And they had, I think, one of the first like real leaders in grassroots marketing, and at least of my generation. It was a good learning experience.
They do that. What is it called? The Fluffenhagen or whatever. Do you know what that is? Did you ever do
Yeah.
that? Where they like people make those crazy contraptions and they try to fly or go over water.
And yeah, they have all of these. So the brand is really interesting and like very well thought out, in that there's this cool, edgy element. And then there's this kind of fun, lighthearted, self-deprecating side. And they try to like round out the brand almost as if it's a person, and do things like community events and the derby race and the flight, the Fluffentag or whatever it's called.
Yeah. It makes good commercials. But so back to San Francisco, like around 2005, obviously blockchain had not come around yet. What was the vibe there like at that time in terms of the technology that was like capturing Silicon Valley's sort of attention?
Yeah, so mobile was hot, and then I was working in mobile, and also just we're in this wave of, hey, if you have a process that has if paper is involved, how can we move it to a computer system? This,
The iPhone came out in 2007, right? Was that?
yeah, and it was like still a fairly broken experience from an app perspective, but I think people knew where it could go. It was frankly very similar to where we are with blockchain now, where you see these building blocks, you saw what was coming. But to think in 2007 that literally 3 years later, you would have 1,000,000 people playing real time in Supercell Clash of Clans game globally around the world in high
I
speed.
spent so much money on Clash of Clans. It's a little embarrassing how much money I spent on Clash of Clans.
Yeah, me too. I started playing just to learn about gamification models
Mhm.
because they're so brilliant. I was like, "Hey, I need to learn this for enterprise software. Like, how do I build better products?" And I started playing, and then, what started as a research assignment turned into like fun addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. Very addicting. And then, so coming into like then 2008, obviously the financial crisis is not really a San Francisco thing, but how did that affect the tech sector in the city at that time?
For me, I had started my first company in 2008. So I'd goods sold to Motorola. We had a big exit, successful exit, and then said, okay, like the founder of the company had become my mentor. And he said, "Hey, I think you can start a company." And so for me, I was like, okay. 3 years ago, I was like slamming my head into other people, playing football, and didn't know anything about tech. And next step was like, hey, I'm going to go try to start an enterprise software company. And we started in June 2008. NASA was our first customer. We actually had a digital currency platform. So you could tokenize internal resources essentially and let people bid on resources internally. And it was the perfect business to be absolutely mowed down by the 2008 financial crisis. And so we had to completely pivot into building what was an AI company. And because we had to build all these, it was just called predictive analytics back then. So we built this analytics platform. But I have to say, it was a real eye opening experience to see how things could go from like boom to bust really quickly. And yeah, so it was interesting. We survived it, but man, it was hard.
So the idea for digital currency was out there, of course, before Bitcoin. Is that? But it was. I don't know. I don't know if I would say it was mainstream. Was that your inspiration for this, or what? How did the digital currency kind of part of it fit, or where did that come from?
I didn't hear of Bitcoin until 2011. So this was just, and we didn't have there's no decentralization, but what we knew is, and the company was called Incentiline. We
Mhm.
knew that currencies could drive incentives and align incentives. And for example, at NASA, if you want access to the wind tunnel, you say, "Oh, I need it tomorrow and I need it for 8 hours and I need it really bad." And the reality is, you say that because you'll probably get it like a week later and for 4 hours. But if you have to start bidding and you say, I could actually reserve this time 2 weeks from now and it's going to cost one fourth amount of this currency that would cost for me to bid it right away. And so we learn incentives drive behavior, and currencies are a great way to drive incentives. And if you look at cryptocurrencies today, it's all about incentive alignment and mathematics. And at the end of the day, it's because we're humans why Bitcoin is secure. Like at any point in time, the miners could decide to try to steal the money, but then Bitcoin wouldn't be worth anything.
Yeah.
And same is true for Ethereum. We were, I think, ahead of the curve, but also behind, not really thinking about it in the same context of how it's really came forward today.
And once you finally learned about Bitcoin in 2011, what was your thought? Did it blow your mind, or did you not get it, or how did that?
I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. It was 2013. I was in China and I was talking to a guy was one of the founders of CoinDesk. And he said, this guy, Shaq Khan, he said, he was just talking about Bitcoin the whole time. And I said, all right, I'll go buy some Bitcoin and I'm going to learn about it. And then that's when I really figured it out. But still, I didn't get it. I just thought about it as a currency. And then when Ethereum launched, I remember reading the original Ethereum website that had all these use cases and learning about DAOs. And that's when my mind was blown. And I said, okay, I've got to go build something in this space.
Yeah. So what was it about that? Was it just the possibilities of that Ethereum opened up rather than a single use case in Bitcoin with a value transfer?
For me, it was about value creation and value creation for a for every actor in an ecosystem instead of value extraction. Coming from Silicon Valley was always like, how can we make as much money as possible, extract as much value as possible, and give value, but how are we going to charge as much as we can and make as much money as we can and get as much data as we can? And not that those are bad values, but that's just what drove the product market fit value capture structure of traditional companies. And I learned about DAOs and about token-based models, and it was like a win could be built where you had users, builders and workers, and service providers. So you have this whole the founding team, the users, the service workers, everybody wins financially and from a goal perspective. And it was just eye-opening. It was a different model. And also like it's superpower in terms of bootstrapping network effects and getting people
Hmm.
involved and growing community. And that to me, the business model adjustment is what really captured my imagination.
Yeah, it is fascinating to me as well that the like you're saying, everyone involved, like the infrastructure, like you can make money from the infrastructure here. Like everyone has access to all these different parts of it, whereas like the internet, only a select few were making money on the TCP, IP sort of stuff and the hardware and things. But this has been flipped on its head with the blockchain economics and things like that. So,
Yeah, and Ethereum's a great example. So you look at the team that behind Ethereum and the people who like bought in on the ICO. Did they extract a bunch of value and make all this money and other people just use the product? No, like everybody, the users, the workers, people running nodes, people building, like everyone won that was involved in like pushing the movement forward. And that can live through now through the whole application level. You look at the future of gaming, you look at the future of social media products, and it's not about, hey, you can monetize your own data, you can be in control and help govern how, the systems work for the applications you use. It's that, and it's still, I think we're still the early days because, we're not at a point where people are being impacted globally with applications in that manner because these things are still just hard to use. But I think we're close and we're on the right path.
well, let's talk about scale then. To tell me what it's about and what was the problem that you were trying to solve when you came up with this. And I also noted you started Scale in the beginning of 2018. So that was you started your other company right at the beginning of the financial crisis. And then 2018 that was just about the beginning of the last bear market. Let me know if you're going to start a company anytime soon so I can get my affairs in order.
Yeah, I know. So for us, for me, it was 2017. I was working out of the SaaSter co-working space, working on another SaaS company, machine learning AI company. And I would go and trying to come up with an idea for the next company I was going to start, which is a really tough situation to be in. And each day I would go there and I would just read about Ethereum, read about crypto. And I said, you know what? I need to start something in this space and again, for those reasons we discussed. And then, so for me, there was I wanted to start an application. I had all these apps that I wanted to start to help bring value to users and transform industries. And then I met Stan Kladko, my co-founder, who's a world-renowned physicist and a cryptographer and Stanford researcher and ran NIST certified cryptography lab for a long time and had started multiple companies. And he also had all these apps he wanted to build, but we both ran into the same conundrum of these things are too costly to use, they're too complicated. And so we designed, so Stan had really, he deserves the credit as the technical visionary. He had designed a system to scale the applications, the Ethereum applications he wanted to build. And then, I said, Stan, why don't we just build this and bring this to the market? Let's help people like us because we believe in Ethereum and let's let people access Ethereum in a more accessible way, in a gas-free manner, in a way that's like financially viable, and it still anchors into the security of Ethereum. And that's before people weren't talking about layer 2, they weren't talking about app chains, they weren't talking about Ethereum scalability. And that was really, and we didn't want to, it was at this time you were either trying to build a competitive layer 1 or you were on the app level. And so for us, that was our own needs drove the requirements for scale. And then we formally started the project January 1st, 2018, and had been working on it for a while in 2017. And then, yeah, and I have to say, it took a long time to build. It was a lot of hard work. A lot of people came together. And this year, in the last year, we've had 72 million plus transactions on chain, and
Yeah.
we crossed over a billion in gas fees. And so it's awesome to see it come together. And we're just one piece of this big Ethereum puzzle that's coming together, and I think working to bring value to a lot of people.
That's amazing. But were there times in from like 2018 to 2020 or so, there was a pretty bad bear market. I remember
Yeah,
I
yeah,
got my book contract then to write about the beginning of Ethereum, and I was like, holy crap, is this going to be like an obituary? Because it really felt dead for quite a while. Did that give you any qualms?
not personally, and we were very protected because we didn't have a token yet, and so we were able to survive it. But we were doing a there was a SAFT financing that happened in 2019, fall of 2019. I got to say that was, or I guess it was summer of 2019, and that was, I've never had to work harder in my life to raise
Yeah.
capital. There were believers out there, but everybody's assets under management, who was in all the VC firms, were no one was holding assets anymore in
Yeah.
USDC. And so the market just took a much harder hit because you had to move back into fiat, have tax implications, and then getting back in, people just wanted to get back in on ETH or Bitcoin. And it was tough, but from a builder perspective, you'd go to the ETH hackathons, and these were just vibrant times. Like the people there, all the sponsors, all the builders, all the hackers. You look at 2 years later, these were all billion-dollar plus value projects that were people that were making the industry move. And so I think a lot of bonding happened during that time and like collective belief.
Yeah.
But it was from the outside very rocky, and ETH hits $87 or something, I think, that
Yeah.
year.
Yeah. I remember that. And in that transition, those 2 years, it's really amazing. Crypto went from this is about a coin to about no, this is about applications. This is about lending. This is about borrowing, all sorts of things that came out in the DeFi summer. And then NFTs followed on the heels of that. That just totally changed how we can treat digital files of any type. So is it too simplistic to say that scale is a layer two?
You know what? I think I like that simplicity, but the industry doesn't.
Yeah.
There's a lot of which the word layer and the number one or two is pretty simple. And we layer into Ethereum at a foundational level. The network shares security with Ethereum and staking lives on Ethereum. But then on top of it, you have these blockchains that are purpose built and designed to and make Ethereum applications run fast. So we're some, without getting into all the technical nuance, some people would say Scale is not a layer two, it's a Ethereum scaling platform, but that happens in the open source world. You get a lot of kind of cranky researchers who want very specific terms. And but yeah, our goal at the end of the day is if you build an application for Ethereum, a game, a Web3 application, something that needs high volume of throughput, we want to help you. The network is there to serve you, to help you deliver zero fee transactions to users, and really bring Web3 to the masses.
Yeah. And so obviously you can't do anything on Ethereum without paying gas. So if the users aren't paying in this system, who's paying for the gas fees?
What happens is in most blockchains, or pretty much almost every blockchain other than Scale, you are paying a transaction fee. On Scale, someone, whether it be an application developer, a business, a company, a DAO, an organization of some type, someone has to pay for the compute space that run the chain. And so you're not paying per transaction, you're actually paying for access to these computers that are or nodes that are cobbled together to create these secure blockchains. And so the payment still happens to validators and stakers, but it's paid for in advance and it's done in a much better unit economic model. You're paying for it's a
Is it
lot
like
less
buying in bulk?
expensive.
Is
Yeah,
it
you're buying in bulk. You're basically
okay?
buying it's imagine if you're renting a car, you're like, okay, I'll rent this vehicle, I'll rent this engine and wheels, and I'll pay per month as opposed to paying per mile. It's a similar model. And so it's just and instead of the end user paying, it's like Web 2 where, hey, last time you took an Uber, did you have to go pay a fee to Amazon, the servers they run? No, they pay
Hmm.
for it.
Hmm.
You just
Yeah,
pay them and the cost gets subsidized back down. And so that's the model for Scale.
it's overhead, just like
Yeah.
any other. Okay. There's a couple things I wanted to get in here to here, but just real quick, while you were building this, I read that half your team was in Ukraine, and then the war broke out, and you guys had to basically get them all to safety. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how things are going now?
Oh yeah, the that was a wild experience. We have 20 some people that were in Ukraine. And I personally went to Ukraine 20 times over the
Mhm.
first since 2000, end of 2017, as we were ideating on Scale all the way up to, I think I went about a month before the war started. And,
Was
you
this
know, I,
Kharkiv you were going?
yeah, I was going to Kharkiv. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just in this the country was just on the rise. It had just grown immensely since I started going. And all these my colleagues, all these people like just completely got uprooted. Some of them were on vacation and they just couldn't go home and they just like,
Mm.
okay, I gotta buy completely new clothing. And some of them had just bought homes or apartments or condos. And so it was just thankfully we were able to get everybody out prior to the war starting. We had a offsite in Lisbon, got everybody to Lisbon, and other than a handful of people that didn't wanted to stay, and then they were out of the country and were legally kind of compliant way able to stay there. But it was just, and it's still to this day, these my colleagues, all these people they're going through a war and their family's still there and there's bombings and it's an immense amount of stress. But
Yeah.
it was a surreal experience in a very bad way, but it was amazing to see people come together and band together and just push through it.
Yeah,
And
I was interested to read about Kharkiv and being parallel to San Francisco in the tech scene and having so many developers and folks there. There's a lot of just, I think, general tech development, right, in that city.
oh yeah, it was just it was going through this massive growth. And the interesting thing about that city is, if you like are smart and you want a job, you learn tech. And so it's not like, imagine whatever school you went to in the US, if 80% of the people, were studying computer science and math instead of all the other things they studied. And it's just produced just so many great math based engineers out of that city. And there's just a really good, numerous good, great universities and ton of talent. And the city was really starting to grow and change and transform. And it's just, I was thinking of like investing and buying property there. And I just believed in it so much. And yeah, it was out of nowhere, there's a war.
I should know this probably, but was there the sense that this was going to happen? Were they making moves to invade, or did this sort of take everyone by surprise? I don't remember really knowing about.
There was always the conflict in Crimea and the eastern part.
Right.
But that was like, oh, these are rebels, these are people that want to defect. There was a lot of non-clarity of the optics. And these two countries were a part of a unified country at one point, and there were a lot of strong connections, and so I think it was a huge disbelief that this would ever happen.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until, and our whole team was like, "Oh, this isn't going to happen. This is all the media hype." And then about 2 weeks or 3 weeks before it happened, all of a sudden everyone was like, "This is actually real.
Yeah.
This is not
This is
media."
not a drill.
Yeah. So I think to your question and point, it was in retrospect, yeah, maybe it seemed like it was bound to happen, but in the time it was not expected reality.
Yeah. And to your point, I think Vladimir Putin still considers that part of like Mother Russia. And I think he's very old school. Back in the Soviet days in the KGB, I think at least my read on it
Yeah,
is,
and there's a lot of suspicion too around what sort of information is he getting. There's this cultural thing where if you bring the messenger gets shot, so no one wants to bring bad news. So who even
no,
knows how connected he is to reality? That's
yeah,
part of the narrative I think that's going in that part of the world.
I think for sure they're showing the world that the Russian military is not even close to what people thought it was, I think, which is, I'm sure, not what he intended by
No.
invading. So let's get back to Scale here. And one thing that I found interesting in reading up on it was you guys are offering on-chain file storage, which I don't know if there's another chain that's doing that right now, but can you tell me a little bit about that and why that's what that allows you to do?
Yeah, because of the nature again of how scale works, where people are renting the space in these nodes, and the primary space in these computers or nodes is utilized to run Ethereum virtual machine, to run execute transactions, smart contracts, just run like a standard blockchain. But because of the dynamics or like of how these nodes are structured, these containers can live and be connected into the Ethereum virtual machine that can serve other functions like file storage. So you could mint an NFT and store it locally on chain instead of just having this image that lives hopefully on Amazon, and you spend all this money and this thing points somewhere else and it hopefully renders a picture. That picture can be stored and certifiably live on chain, which is really cool. Or you could run machine learning models and not train models, but you could execute AI models in a blockchain if you want trustless execution of a model. And so that we built Scale ML back in 2018, the goal of letting, TensorFlow models run in the file storage container. But and so that's I'm really curious to see what the builders and developers that are building on Scale do with that, especially with the onset of AI. And I spent a decade working in AI. A lot of our team spent a lot of time working in AI and advanced analytics. Yeah, file storage does some cool stuff, but the most basic thing it does is just store NFT images, which is cool.
Yeah, and you make a great point that like what you're buying when you buy an NFT is a hash, right? That points to somewhere else. You don't actually have the image on chain. What are the areas that like folks are using Scale for? Is it gaming? Is it NFTs? Is it like where are you guys finding the most demand for this kind of fast and very inexpensive blockchain?
As you would probably expect, like high volume transactions that where you want lower costs. So gaming is a huge, probably 70% of the utilization of Scale, the projects that are joining. The other 30% are projects that are building Web3 applications and loyalty programs with NFTs and NFT gating and decentralized social media products and all these use cases that are frankly just not even possible if you have to pay even 1 cent per transaction. They just aren't feasible to utilize a blockchain if you want to do millions of these things a day for an application. And so
Yeah.
that's where we're just seeing a lot of really strong developer interest. And if you check out the blog, you can see a lot of there's just announcement, almost 2 or 3 a week that are being announced that are people that are building on Scale.
Yeah, that's cool. That kind of brings me to another point that I wanted to talk to you about, and that's just like blockchain economics. The Ethereum Foundation has always had to rely on, obviously, they had their initial sale back in the day, but to keeping these things going in perpetuity, I think is challenging. And so, how are you guys dealing with that? And maybe you can just, yeah, I don't have any idea, but it's always interested me when you're providing the infrastructure for this stuff. There's not a lot of ways to monetize that, or am I missing something?
Yeah, Scale has built-in monetization where people can pay for blockchains. And the network has been in a very, what I'd say, just like all networks, I think they're in a loss leader growth stage where you're not trying to maximize your fees, you're trying to maximize your growth. But with on-chain governance, my understanding is there's going to be a proposal pretty soon that helps take the network to the next level to really start focusing more on monetization, which is a natural step, right? You want to start with growth. You don't want to impede. You look at all the like products in Web 2, there's just I think a real strong grow first, monetize later strategy. And I think blockchains are going through the same thing, but you do need sound economics. If you don't have sound economics, then these are just like, eventually the music stops and people don't have seats to sit down on.
Yeah, and yeah, it's always struck me as odd that a lot of the Web3 world it relies on like old-fashioned sort of grants to continue. Like the Gitcoin grant program is hugely popular. It just seems like for such a futuristic industry and endeavor to have to rely on the goodwill of other people to keep it going. It's just odd.
And it can be frustrating like selling into the space because we're really finding some really great partners now that they don't want to go with a chain that's just going to give them a lot of money or give them a huge grant. They're willing to pay
Hmm.
because they want the best product. But it is frustrating when you're selling and you have somebody that says, okay, how much money will you give us? And it's maybe we're not a good fit to work together. There's other people that are just literally, and part of it is, I think if you just have EVM running on a different blockchain and you fork Geth, you don't really have a differentiator. And so you're using grants to try to buy customers and buy partners. And that's not sustainable. I think we're going to see those models exposed. I won't name any names, but there's I think some really strong examples of that. But yeah, part of it makes sense. The other part is we've got to show that economic viability in order to show the sustainability of the industry.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned AI, and I'm curious. Obviously, it's a very hot topic. How do you see that integrating into blockchain? And are there pain points that can be eased with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, my feeling, I've got a blog that's going out, which may or may not be out by the time this is released, but it's around the three phases of where I personally believe AI will impact blockchain. And the first phase is just like building with AI. I think we're going to see 10x the amount of dApps built in the next year because builders are going to get so many efficiencies to code faster, QA
Mhm.
faster, test faster, and just be able to turn out products like you with these AI tools. You can even a non-developer can build a robust application in a weekend. So I think there's going to be this just like utilization to build. The next phase, I think we're going to actually start seeing a lot of applications that are decentralized that utilize centralized AI as a component. Like in gaming, for example, there's a game called Minerva by the Crypto Coliseum team that has a AI chat feature. You can actually talk to this oracle personality that will tell you things and predict things. And
Mhm.
so you start seeing these like integrated experiences. And then I think the last phase is just where you actually have like deep integration with AI and blockchain. And these things are working together in this smart, sophisticated, integrated manner. But I think personally that's a ways off. We're going to not see that really happening for 3, 5, 10 years where these things are like at their fabric, deeply interwoven.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. And then another thing that Scale is obviously helping promote or create is the metaverse. There's a lot of, I don't know, there's been a lot of talk recently about the metaverse, whether it's working or not. What's your take on it? And what does the metaverse mean to you as a term?
Yeah, I think the term metaverse is one that has been definitely got swung around in the hype cycle. And if you think about it, metaverse could be a lot of things. Think about all like the games people play. Think about the chat environments where they aren't themselves and they have a different personality or handle and anonymous. And in a way, those are all metaverses too. But when I think about it, I think it's just more, and obviously thinks it's important enough that they change their entire company name. But I do think that technology and blockchain in particular is going to provide a ton of value to this like digital world that we can live in. And I think there'll be lots of them. And imagine back when you and I were Clash of Clans addicts, if we also could be talking to each other and have a personality that we own that was an NFT avatar and be trading and like more living in this world, immersed in it as from a community perspective, like while you were playing. And I think that's the real hook. But the term metaverse, I think, is a little bit overused and misunderstood.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. But it's been interesting to watch how it's evolving. And I think a lot of brands are coming around to the idea that they shouldn't be charging for NFTs that are allowing you access to the metaverse. It should be something that's free and that's like trying to promote what they're selling, but it's also creating a new way for you to interact with your customers or if you're a musician with your fans. And I think a lot of that is definitely evolving before our eyes, but that's one thing that's always been so fascinating about watching this space for me anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I think people they got it wrong the first step when like, let's sell these expensive
Yeah.
NFTs and they don't
Yeah.
figure out stuff you can do with them. And now, yeah, people have, oh, you know what? Let's not sell these. Let's give them to people if they do things and then let's let them earn and gain more value. And eventually, the more they're immersed in doing these things, then these things are going to accrue value, have real utility value and with perks. And so anyways,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're
Very well
totally
said.
right.
Yeah. So just like lastly, I was reading about you and one quote stood out to me. You were quoted as saying that there's a massive misunderstanding about our industry. And I was just wondering if you could dive into that a little bit. And do you still feel that way or are we still in the midst of this misunderstanding?
Yeah, I think I don't know exactly which quote you're referring to. My guess is maybe it had something to do with this whole like tokens and FTX debacle and
I think it was
you
in
know
the
deep.
Nob Hill Gazette.
Oh
They
yeah,
were
yeah.
writing
Okay, there we go.
about Shack 15 or whatever,
Yeah, so
Crypto
that's
Underground. Yeah.
and that may have even been prior to FTX. But there's still this was like the Terra collapse was happening, and there
Mhm.
was all this. The cards were tipped, and they were the things were starting to fall. And so I think the misunderstanding is, oh, these crypto people are trying to shill tokens or looking. I had my kids' preschool happy hour, and there's a guy saying, "Oh, it's all just talk for marks, and this whole decentralization, and people are just looking to." Get people to buy into this thing and shill tokens. And I was like, you really don't get it, do you?
Yeah.
And part of
Yeah.
it is he was a really smart guy that likes to be a futurist, and I think didn't believe in blockchain, and he didn't feel like he could switch teams ever. But that's where the misunderstanding is, because you look at the people I deal with every day are builders, and they're just like seeing this as a tool to build better applications that bring more value back to users, as opposed to a tokenized rug pull that you see. And so that's, I hope to see that continually evolve and change. But I think will always be a byproduct of high growth, high money industries. You're going to just have a lot of that junk.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the potential here for it's going to save that guy money if this works out, right? It's going to be more transparent. It's going to be more secure. There's all sorts of benefits that people, I don't know why they don't see it, but I think a lot of it is willful. But I decided many years ago to just, I don't have time for those folks anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've had that argument too many times, and it's fine if you want to think that, but we're going to continue on building the next internet and whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you need the haters, if you don't have them, you're not doing a good job. And it's like first they laugh at you, then they ignore you, and then they try to stop you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're in that stopping phase now in terms of like DC, at least, regulation and what's going on. Jack, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been fascinating, and for all your insights. Tell people how they can learn more about Scale and how they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Jack O'Halloran. You can learn about Scale, go to scale.space, that's SKALE.space, and get access to the Discord server and join the community, or find the GitHub if you want to see all the code. Everything's fully open source, or follow the Scale Twitter. Yeah, excited to, anybody here wants to join the community. There are a lot of great people that are building and involved. So
that's great. Yeah. Best of luck with Scale, Jack. And it was a pleasure talking. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was fun. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on the show.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to rate and follow this show on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Decent People is a production of Decential Media. It is produced by Matt Bogart, with music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes.